As many of you know, I mean, obviously, I have a probiotics company. I started the Bio Collective, which was all about microbes. And along the way, I met Morley Robbins, and he has been on here a couple of times. He was on here about a month ago, and really started to learn about the importance of minerals and how mineral deficiency in our food supply was impacting us, and started working closely with Morley, showing him how the microbes transform the minerals and looking at those pieces together. And where a lot of this happens actually is at the membranes, this interface that we have. And of course, the messages are coming from all those molecules that are passing through the membranes. So tonight we're just going to kind of cover these topics, and then I'll open it up for questions, and we'll just kind of see where it goes. So for most of you who've been here before, you're familiar with me. I'm the founder of the Bio Collective and BiotiQuest Probiotics. If you're interested, I have a TED Talk, Do Microbes Predict or Cause Diseases like Parkinson's? And I got into all of this because of my husband John's Parkinson's disease. And it's really taken me on quite a journey. So what is the microbiome? What are these mighty microbes? We're actually more microbial than we are human. I talk about that a lot. And I think the average person does not realize that. In terms of the number of microbes, there are 100 trillion microbes in and on our body. And we have the human genome, but we also carry all the DNA or the genome of all the bacteria, fungi, and viruses in our body. And that is on order of magnitude. There are anywhere between 150 to 300 times more bacterial genes than there are human genes. And there are many things that only the bacteria are making. And I will talk about that a bit later on, but there are 3 critical amino acids that we don't make for ourselves, but the microbes have the genes to make those, and they make those in our gut. In terms of human cells to bacterial cells, I think the consensus now is about 2 to 1, two bacterial cells for every human cell. So again, more microbial than human. Weighs about 4 pounds, and it's made up of all these different organisms and the bioactive peptides and molecules that they're making. So what does it do? Well, the microbiome is doing digestion and nutrient metabolism. It's making many of our neurotransmitters, so the gut-brain hormones. 70% of our immune system is in our gut, and that is where a lot of that training happens when we're babies. In the gut, trains our immune system. It regulates metabolism, so that energy storage and expenditure, which is a lot of what Sugar Shift is focused on, is this energy storage and expenditure area. It's producing your B vitamins. It's regulating inflammation. It's fermenting all kinds of different metabolites. It does detoxification. It's producing those amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine, short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which is essential for feeding the cells of the gut lining. And when things are in balance, it's also providing pathogen protection. So we know microbes are everywhere. Of course, in the last 4 years, we've kind of had the reign of terror again, where everyone thinks that we have to sanitize ourselves to death, and the next big killer is right around the corner. And that mentality of kill, kill, kill And disinfection, of course, is it's impacting us. There's something called the hygiene hypothesis that talks about how this over-sanitized world we're living in has had a tremendous impact on us. And the same thing is happening down here in our soil with all the chemical agriculture we're using, is really having an impact on our microbial diversity. And those microbes at these interfaces are what transform these minerals. And I know some of you have been with us for a while, some of you not. So I have a little book that I talk about a lot. It's my favorite little book called The Life Bridge, The Way to Longevity with Probiotic Nutrients. And a good portion of that book talks about how the microbes transform the minerals into more bioavailable molecules. And I'm actually working on an update. I didn't write that book. I tried to get the authors to write an update. It's about 20 years old, but I couldn't get them to. So I actually just started writing an update myself, and I hope to get that book launched later this year. So minerals. Minerals are cofactors for hundreds of enzymes involved in metabolism. Without minerals, you don't have the active enzymes. Again, that life bridge, I just love that term because it's taking inorganic matter, which is these inorganic minerals, and transforming them into an organic molecule that can be absorbed as nutrition into our body. Minerals are essential for energy production. All energy production requires minerals. And microbes and cells can't make energy without minerals. Organophosphate herbicides, I talk about glyphosate a lot in various presentations. I have an article in the Weston Price Journal last quarter about glyphosate and minerals. And glyphosate tightly binds minerals. It was originally made as a minerals chelator. And when it binds those minerals, it makes them inaccessible for the enzyme cofactors. So there's a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, Douglas Wallace, who has said that all disease is an energy deficiency. Let's see. So what are we made of? So mostly, so 97.7% were made of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and calcium. But there are all these other trace elements, they call them, because we're not made up that much of them, that are key to life. So phosphorus, which is a structural component of nucleotide coenzymes, ATP, which is part of energy, contains phosphorus, and the moving around of those phosphorus molecules is part of what's going on in energy. Magnesium. Magnesium is essential for the excitation of your muscles and nerves. It's a cofactor for over 300 enzyme reactions involving the energy storage molecule ATP. And magnesium, there are a lot of, if you go to the market and you start looking at magnesium, there are a lot of different forms of magnesium, and many of them are not very bioavailable. So the thing that the microbes do is it makes the minerals in a sort of nano size, which makes them much more easy to absorb. Copper, if you joined us for Morley Robbins, Morley, it's all about copper. It's really an essential cofactor in some of the key energy enzymes in the body. Cytochrome C oxidase, which is a key part of the mitochondrial respiratory chain, which is where that energy gets produced. It's also involved in the recycling of iron, and iron is what's carrying oxygen in the body. So if copper's not working properly, then iron's not working properly, and it can present as oftentimes people will think they're anemic, but the problem is actually copper. And then, you know, there's iron, of course, which is the central metal in the hemoglobin molecule. And then zinc, which is essential for 100 enzymes, and some of those are also involved in energy metabolism. And there's lots more on the periodic table. So here's our periodic table of elements. And you see in the blue, those are essential elements for people. And the yellow are, I think, essential elements for plants. It says they're both people. But anyway, these are some of those key elements that are moving and important to all those enzymes. Hydrogen up here, of course, one of the most important, hydrogen and oxygen, which makes water, and we're a huge percent water. So key trace elements and enzyme cofactors for energy production. Back to magnesium, as I said, about 300 different enzymes require magnesium. That energy molecule ATP synthesis and utilization requires magnesium. It is required for making RNA and DNA. So repairing and restoring our RNA and DNA in the system and keeping us healthy and living well for a long time. Iron, that assists in energy production. It's also involved in DNA synthesis, and it's required for red blood cell function. Copper, energy production, iron recycling and metabolism, and amidation of something called neuropeptides and hormones. And that is really one of the key untold stories, I think, of copper is this. There's one particular enzyme called peptidoglycine alpha amidating monooxygenase, which is a real mouthful. But for short, you can call it PAM, the PAM enzyme. And that enzyme is essential for the activation of about 50% or more of the neuropeptides and hormones in the human body, meaning they will not work properly without that peptide, and that peptide requires copper. So a very key component that a lot of people have never heard of. Zinc, again, that's energy production, protein, RNA, DNA synthesis, and hemoglobin. But another kind of little unknown factor for most people is if you get too much zinc, it blocks the uptake of and usage of copper. So if you think back over the last 4 years with COVID and the recommendation, take zinc, take zinc, take zinc, you do not want to take large doses of zinc every day without for any period of extended time, because it will disrupt your copper metabolism. And then manganese, that's involved in an enzyme called SOD, which is a detoxifier, and manganese is also very important in plants for the structure of the lignin in the plant. And so when we start getting all of these disrupted in the plant material too, it starts to cause issues. And if you want to read more about that, you can go to the Weston Price article, and it goes into pretty good detail on what happens with glyphosate in a plant and in our own collagen when it binds up these minerals. So what's happening here in the gut? Vitamins are extracted and produced in the gut by microbes. So you can see here, there are different sections of our gut, and we talk about these sometimes, but in the duodenum, that's where a number of these B vitamins, A, D, E, and K, those are your fat-soluble vitamins. That's where that uptake is occurring. In the jejunum, A, D, E, and K, again, those fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin C, which can be made by microbes, and B vitamins. And then your minerals in both of these places are being taken up. And then In the ileum, you've got C, D, K, you've got those B's again, you've got the minerals selenium, magnesium, and manganese. And then you get to the colon, and that is B7 and vitamin K, the minerals potassium, sodium, chloride, and your short chain fatty acids. And all of this is being sort of made along the way and secreted into the tissues of the body. So again, these, I call them the mighty microbes, and this is just an example of the Krebs cycle and B vitamin production and where along the pathway with these microbes. And I have a rather detailed paper that actually tells you which microbes can make which of these B vitamins. But there's a lot of B vitamin deficiency these days, and much of that is due to the disruption in the minerals and the microbiome, where these are the energy producing vitamins. With low B vitamins, low energy. Just pretty pictures. So again, that life bridge. So if you're not familiar with the mitochondria, that's known as the energy powerhouse of our cells. Mitochondria are relatives of bacteria. They both have a Krebs cycle, and magnesium activates most of the key enzymes in the Krebs cycle. So again, that magnesium is really, really essential. So a lot of action is occurring in these membranes. Again, you can see here in different sections kind of which. So chromium, that's one we didn't talk about, but chromium here is in, I think chromium is in the jejunum, and that also affects blood sugar. So sometimes you'll see blood sugar supplements that have chromium in them. So these membranes, so I found this interesting. I did this presentation about a year ago, and I was just really beginning to hear the term, the glycocalyx, from Dr. Barry Ninham, a scientist in Australia that I have been most fortunate to become friends with over the last 15 months. And we're working on a Parkinson's disease publication that I think is going to explain the battle in the gut and the physical chemistry that happens in the body that presents in a variety of different symptoms. But at this membrane, what is a membrane? I like this term ecotone, but Barry tells me it's too esoteric for most people. It's actually an ecological term where if you have a transition area between two biological communities, so say at the ocean, where the ocean meets the sand, there's that ecotone of those two different environments. And then as you move up from the sand into a wooded area, for example, that would be an ecotone. And it's really in those meeting areas where there's often the most diversity of species. And of course, we're talking about microbial diversity. But so along these membranes in our gut flowing along, we have our nutrients, there's pathogens that we're taking in through our food, there's chemicals. We're producing waste products and sometimes consuming waste products. And so you have all this sort of particulate that's moving along, and you have the little villi that are kind of checking it out and trying to see what's there and what they actually need to do with it. So the information from the food and the microbes moves through the body membranes, and that's our barrier between all of this matter moving through the central digestive system and our blood vessels and tissues and all of that. But this is a very thin membrane that is our area of protection. So when you have a gap in the membrane, a lot of people have heard of leaky gut, but when you have these gaps in the membrane in the gut, cellular debris or even proteins from food that is not completely digested can cross over that membrane. And one that you may have heard me talk about before on other presentations I've done is something called lipopolysaccharide. And lipopolysaccharide is the cell walls of gram-negative bacteria, and it's highly inflammatory. And when it crosses that gut barrier, it can get in the bloodstream and can really go anywhere in the body. And there are animal models using lipopolysaccharide to mimic different diseases. And there's a Parkinson's model. It's known to cause depression. It's also used in diabetes models. I think there's an MS model. So it has a lot of different action if you get lipopolysaccharide crossing that barrier. There's many other cellular debris components that can also cause problems that are not lipopolysaccharide, but it's cell walls from other organisms or proteins from food that hasn't been properly digested. So that's this, it's a key inflammatory danger signal. And oftentimes in sepsis, if you're familiar with sepsis, when somebody gets an infection, they get this metabolic endotoxemia, and that's often what will kill them. So, you know, back to our little diagram here, we have these chemical and electrical messages that are being produced and read along this lining to tell the system what is going on. Now, in March, when Petra comes and talks to us, she'll probably talk to us in a little more detail about the glycocalyx and what that membrane is in our cardiovascular system. But it's essentially the membrane throughout the body. So the cardiovascular system, the blood-brain barrier, the gut lining, all of those are very similar in their structures. And so we'll cover that in March when Petra comes to talk to us. So what's going on with these chemical messages, and, you know, how does all of this work, and the gut-brain connection? So the GI tract is home to 500 million enteric neurons. And, you know, it's often called the second brain, but I sometimes wonder if the guts maybe are our first brain. But 70% of the body's immune cells are in the gut, and of course, those trillions of microbes. And the vagus nerve is interconnected with the organs and the brainstem. So it's kind of like the central highway, if you will. I don't know if maybe I would call it the Autobahn. And this is just a handful of the chemical messages, neuropeptides, hormones that are being made and transported throughout the body by the microbes in the gut. And what happens, so this is, there's something called a cell danger signal. So when you start to get something like, for example, the LPS, you know, the body starts to recognize that and it turns on a danger signal. And so you're having this balancing back and forth between your sensory nervous system and your immune system trying to address the problem. So if you're in a chronic inflammatory state, then your nervous system is constantly on high alert. So it's in this state of stress. Well, going back for a moment to the minerals, when we get in a state of stress, it burns up the energy. So it's burning up the minerals that we have. It's burning up that magnesium. It's burning up that copper. It's depleting those minerals much, much faster than it would if everything was in a nice, happy homeostasis here. So those signals are getting sent throughout the system. I mean, we talked a lot tonight about our bodies and what's going on in here, but these same kind of signals are going on outside in the environment, in our soil, the danger signals that are going into our plants, in our animals, the danger signals that are going on there, because we don't have healthy ecosystems anymore because of the way we have been growing our food, treating our environment, and treating ourselves. So it's thrown all of this out of balance. And the minerals imbalance, I think, is probably the primary driver of a lot of what's going on, the damage to the membranes, the lack of microbial diversity, the shift to a more pathogenic microbiome. And so it's depleting our microbial partners across the system. And that, I think, you know, I'm going to be I don't want to be political, because I think, well, like, we live in a mad world at the moment. But what I will say is, I do think that Robert Kennedy is focused on some of these key things with what's going on, you know, from the food all the way through the human body. And at least it has elevated the conversation so that more people can have a conversation about what is going on in our collective ecosystems and how it's affecting our health. Because, I mean, I can tell you, before I got into the microbiome, I was an executive in a company where we had properties in 62 cities across the United States, and I was always on an airplane. And I can tell you, 20 years ago, when I used to board an airplane, there was seldom a wheelchair. And now, when I board airplanes, there are anywhere from 5 to 10 wheelchairs per flight. And I look as I'm walking through the airport, and it's not the same airport that I saw 20 years ago. So there's clearly a serious problem going on in our collective health. And I think it's here. It's here in the microbes, the minerals, the membranes, and how that has disrupted all of these critical messages that are so important to a healthy life. So